And right now I would like to introduce Larry D'Amico, our facilitator for today's program. Hi, Larry.
Hi. Well, okay. So this is going to be a mouthful for me. I have to admit, I did not know Jasper Johns the way I know him now. When I started out with this, I really didn't. He was not somebody who I was all that attracted to. I, liked some of the images, but I really didn't know that much about him until I really started to dig into this. And he is a truly remarkable, complex, profound artist, actually, in his own way. And I was not expecting that. The truth is that, all I knew of him were these classic images of the flags and the targets and, the numbers and colors and things like that. They're interesting pieces, but I really had a very superficial take on what this work is about. And I now know there's a lot more to it. And I'm going to share some of that with you. So basically, he came to New York in a time when the abstract expressionists were at their height. It was, 1954, 55, when he really, well, actually, I think he came in 53. And basically, he hooked up with Robert Rauschenberg. They were lovers and fellow artists, and were really kind of the founding fathers of pop art. But that's only the beginning. So, he did flags, targets, stenciled words, numbers, maps, kind of the naming of colors and things like that. This is just the appearance of things, but basically it really is a study of signs and symbols, and the question of what they mean is up to us, but the resonance of what these images are about is something that he would explore throughout his career, and it's a long career. Okay, this exhibit that's coming to the Whitney and to the Philadelphia Museum simultaneously is an amazing show. It's called My Mirror, and basically it's going to be in both museums. It'll comprise about 500 works. So this is a huge endeavor and a huge show. So I'll get started. The 48 stars and red and white stripes depict a picture of the American flag. This was from the year that it was made, so there's only 48 stars on there. It was before, we had a couple more states. So this was painted in 54, 55. Johns had a dream, and in this dream, he saw himself painting an enormous American flag. And he got up the next morning and went to work painting it. And one of the things that he got into with this was collaging underneath the surface. There's newspaper, there's cloth, there's all kinds of things collaged onto the surface and then painted over. He started out painting with enamel paint, and it was taking forever to dry. So that's when he got the idea of going crossing over into encaustics, which is basically mixing paint in with wax, so it dries very quickly. And that is what he did, basically, and working up this remarkable surface. Well, basically, it's a very commonplace symbol. It did away with him trying to come up with a design for what he was going to paint. Let me move on here. And this is a close-up of what the encaustic looks like. Now, you know, basically, what it comes down to is the abstract expressionists were into this very heavy emotive thing. They were into this idea that the mark making, that the gesture, that the artist's soul was in the brushwork, in the mark making that took place. De Kooning and Franz Kline were, you know, this intense, passionate kind of brushwork and, you know, kind of minimal reference to the figure or a landscape, where the paint application here is methodical with John's. He's putting on this paint. It's kind of a ritual. It's very, you know, very much about how the paint goes on, the method of putting the paint on. And it's a very abstract surface. It's a beautiful surface that he creates with this wax and pigment. And he continued with this and actually comes back to it repeatedly throughout the years. Now, this two flags is from 1962. The one I showed you, that I just showed you, was from 1955. So he stuck with this into the 60s, into the late 60s. He was continuing to do the flags, and he actually has done some references to it, even in the newest work that's out there. Let's see. I'm going to do a little zoom in here and go in on this. And basically what you see is this brushwork and how you know, the hatching that's there and the hint of this yellow, a few little spots. So he's using these primary colors into it. You know, red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors. And so he's you know, integrating the primaries into this thing. But also what we're looking at is a very abstract surface. It's about how this paint goes on. The interest is in the interaction of the brushwork more than it is about anything else. The flag is just this very simple design that he's using. Okay. And he continues with this. You know, these are the one on the left is from the 60s. The one on the right is actually from 1986, 87. So, you know, and they're much more abstracted. If you can see, one of the things about this is we have this image is laden with so many associations for all of us. And what he's doing in bringing this image to us is questioning those assumptions, questioning those associations. And, you know, if you look at this thing as an object, as a set of stripes and star-like shapes on a field of color, that's what this is. Okay, we have all these associations we bring to it. He is putting this out there and saying, this is what it is. This is an object that I'm creating. And yeah, it's got all that stuff going on. What is that for you? Okay. And out of those flags, you know, there was a minimalist movement that took place in the 60s. Field painting. Barnett Newman is the one on the left. And actually, this is from the late 60s. It's from 1967, I believe. I can't see it. Yeah, 1967. Barnett Newman was one of the original abstract expressionists. He was very much influenced by this younger painter who was doing these really minimal images. And on the right is Sean Scully, who is a terrific abstract painter. As a matter of fact, he's got a show on that's ending, I think, today, unfortunately. I wish I'd gotten to see it. And he came up through the 60s and came to these very spare, big abstract pieces. It's a large scale piece. I don't know, I don't have the dimensions on it, but this is, it's a relief painting, which again, harkens back to some of what we're going to get into with John. So I'm going to keep moving because I got so many images to go through. Okay. And again, removing the color from the flag and having this thing just be a presence, a design. What does that do? What does that say? This is a large scale piece. This is 60 by 120 inches. So this is a really big piece. You know, the white flag as object, you know, the scale, the absence of what is expected. What does it mean? You know, it's a really lovely surface, this collaged and worked up surface. What does it say to us? Okay. What do we bring to it? What happens when the color is gone? Okay. And here's a detail of one of those stars, and you can see how luscious this paint application is. This waxy stuff that's kind of dabbed on there, and you know it was really part of that process. And the piece on the left is from 1994. So again, he's back to the flag, submerged, you know, under this black, and just a hint of color showing through it. And I also included this lithograph that Johns did from 1973 of the two Picasso faces facing each other. And this is this figure ground thing. This is this business of things being one thing and another at the same time. The question of what is it? You know, is it two faces? Is it a cup? It's two faces and a cup at the same time. Can you see both of those? Well, that's the question with these flags also. They are these resonant images, but they're also these flat surfaces that have paint on them. Okay, and now Rauschenberg and Johns next to each other. The three flags from 1958 in caustic on canvas. It's assembled. It's a relief painting, and this piece called Collection by Rauschenberg, which is, you know, basically they're very different characters. there's basically Rauschenberg is a few years older than Johns. Basically, he was about 5 years older than Johns, and he was into embracing, taking in everything. It's kind of he threw everything in, where Johns focused on this one thing at a time, these iconic images, and worked them up. And here are the two of them at breakfast, I suppose. I'm not sure if it's breakfast or dinner. Anyway, and they were very close. They really interacted a lot, talked about each other's work, slept together, and basically had a very, very powerful relationship. There were several other people that come into the picture, and I'm gonna move along here. Okay, and here we have the targets. And the interesting part with these targets is basically, he's got this assemblage piece with, these body parts in these little trapdoors on the one on the left. And notice that, what is a target? The target is a kind of sighting symbol for target practice. It really is a way of like focusing. And notice that of all the body parts up there, there are no eyes. And notice the one in the middle, where the targets here, the faces are there, but their eyes are covered. So again, it's this double thing that's going on there, this questioning. This functionality of this thing is one thing and another. It's a questioning of what this thing means as an object. And then you have Bed by Robert Rauschenberg here, and it's kind of he embraces the world. It's inclusive. It's kind of bringing in this quilt that he found out on the street and integrating it into his painting. The painting, again, is on the wall. This bed you cannot sleep in. So, there's a little bit of funny business going on in these things, and questioning the functionality of these things. They're representational, but they're not. There's an indication of human presence, but no, there's a sighting tool, but no eyes to see it. There's a bed on the wall that you can't sleep in. Okay, so we're going to we're going to take a little sidetrack into the erased de Kooning. Okay, so Rauschenberg went to de Kooning. He was working on an idea of erasing drawings and kind of like, eliminating the past and moving on to the future. That's my take on it. He didn't say that. Basically he went to de Kooning and asked de Kooning for a drawing and told him exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to erase it. Now, de Kooning at the time was like, he was big time. This guy was like, even for that time, he was selling paintings for $10,000 a piece, which was an unheard of price in 1953. Oh my God. I wish I could get my hands on one of those. Anyway, it basically, he had to talk de Kooning into it. They sat down with a couple of glasses of whiskey and he had to negotiate it out of him. But he finally did get de Kooning to give him a drawing, and he gave him a really, really hard drawing to erase. He just picked through his portfolio, picked out the hardest drawing he could find. It had, you know, grease pencil on it, and ink and charcoal and all kinds of different grease pencils and stuff like that. So it took Rauschenberg, I think he said something like 2 months working on it with all these different kinds of erasers to erase it. On the right, you see an infrared shot of the drawing that shows what traces are left on the paper. And on the left, you're seeing, on the right, you're seeing the drawing. On the left, you're seeing what he erased off and a little label on it. Okay. So there's these three guys. That's John Cage, Jasper Johns, and Merce Cunningham. And Rauschenberg was also one of the guys. These folks were working at the time. They were all influenced by Marcel Duchamp in different ways, and I'm going to talk more about Marcel Duchamp in a minute. But you know, Cage wrote a book called Silence that some of you may be familiar with, but as a musician, composer, to write a book called Silence is a very interesting juxtaposition. His interest was in using everyday objects, found objects, loops, sounds on the street as his form of music. And the book that he wrote, Silence, is really fun and funny and interesting and provocative to read. Very influenced by Eastern thought, but also by Duchamp, which is basically the Dadaist movement, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. But we'll go to Jasper Johns. Jasper Johns worked with both of these guys. Merce Cunningham, of course, was a great dancer, modernist, used the I Ching to compose his dances, used Cage and Rauschenberg and Johns as his music and set designers, and it's a very interesting collaboration between these folks. Now, this is Marcel Duchamp, and he scandalized the art world with his piece called Fountain, which is basically a urinal that he set up on a stand, and it basically confounded the art world and the world in general. They didn't know what he was talking about. Now, what Duchamp was doing was saying that art is not some distant thing. It's something that we participate in, that we decide what is art, that him signing this urinal made it art. You see behind him one of his ready-mades. He used to call these things ready-mades. And basically this bicycle wheel that was attached to this stool. He was basically the father of conceptual art and performance art, and was a very profound influence on Johns and Rauschenberg and many of the pop artists, basically breaking down the barriers between what is commercial, what is a popular image, an everyday image, an everyday object, and art. So he was a revolutionary. He was very much critical of the society and the restrictions that were placed on what we saw as art. So the combines, basically, the piece on the right is a Rauschenberg called Canyon, and he found things out on the street and just sort of assembled them and put them together. Now, I have at other points talked about Kurt Schwitters, who was a quote-unquote dadaist artist, and he created collages and things like that. Well, you know, Rauschenberg would have been familiar with that. And on the left is a John's piece, and he's integrating writing into it. He's, you know, the broom is a functional part of the painting. In fact, you can see the sweep of it as part of the piece. Okay, so, you know, the found objects and devices, the naming of things is very much part of what this is. Now, this is, you know, years before Andy Warhol put his Campbell's soup can out there and said, "This is art." Okay, and John's use of stencils and basically layering of image over image is something that he used throughout the coming images. So you're going to see a number of these pieces where he explores this. And he didn't just do one of these. He did I'd say at least a few dozen paintings and drawings and actually sculptures and prints using this kind of random overlaying. And what starts to happen here is the readability of the image becomes obscured, and you start to try, and if you look at this piece for a while, you start to see numbers emerge and dissolve again and come back out. And you know, I spent time looking at this thing, and it's like the abstract quality of it starts to take over at times, and then the numbers start to come back out. So there's this whole thing again about this business of the figure ground, of the here and the not here, of the presence of the numbers, and yet they're obscured. So, you know, he sticks with sort of these primary colors, the red, yellow, blue, though they turn sort of orangey and green in places where there's overlaps between those primary colors, but still in all, it's a fairly large scale piece too. So I try to decipher this, but I get lost in the process. And that is, I think that's part of what he was aiming for, or what came out of this exploration for him. And then the piece on the right is device circle. Now he's gotten into these device things where it's like you can see there's a little crank and handle, and this thing spins around. It makes a radius in there, and you know, the lettering using the stenciling comes and it goes, it fades in and out. So this is part of this business of the figure ground, of the gestalt, of the idea of seeing this thing as a whole and seeing individual things kind of emerge out of it. You know, there's collaged material that's in there that kind of comes out at times. Okay, and now there's this piece. The colors and numbers. It's a very resonant image. You know, these colors kind of vibrate. And I will talk a lot more next week about Cézanne and and John's, what John's got from the kind of hovering and quivering quality of Cézanne's marking, but it's in here, and you'll have to trust me for now. Next week I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, and the two balls is a painted object. Okay, it's a canvas. It's a canvas with a hole in it. It's a canvas with a hole with two balls stuck in it. It's actually, it's an object. And that's one of the things that he was trying to say to us in this, or actually explore in this with us, is the fact that this is an object that he's painting. It's poking a hole in the third wall. It's like in theater when the actor turns to us and says, see, this is a play. I'm talking to you and I'm telling you certain things. Well, this is a painting. This is an object on the wall. Along with saying some other things about paint and color and things like that, it is an object that's on the wall. The hanger on the right is kind of a frottage thing where he'll lay the paper over the top of the hanger and then go over it with a waxy crayon and then paint over the top of that. He's into these processes, these techniques. One of the things that he was trying to do during this period of time was remove the emotional from the work. Later on in his career, he found that was a fool's errand, but we'll talk more about that as we go along. And again, his influence on minimalism, on color field painting, on other artists at that time, you know, with his use of the target. Now, this is a Kenneth Nolan target on the right, painted in 1958. Now, Johns had been doing these targets for at that point since 1955. So Nolan would have been aware of what Johns was up to. And removing the color, removing the target, removing the sighting tool, but keeping the resonance. The paint is paint on a flat surface. The functionality of using this as a sighting device is gone, but there's still, you still get that it's a target. You still get that it's that form. It's that thing. So what is it? It's a painting. Okay. And now, basically, you know, this is a whole other story. Now, these pieces are both bronze cast pieces. The Savarin can with the paintbrushes stuck in it is something he would have seen in his studio. But what he did was he cast it in bronze and then painted it to look like it was the can that was in his studio. So it's this business of what's real, what's not real, what's a found object, what is a created object, what's the difference between those things. Okay, so the Ballantine ale cans is another matter. And
Harry, we heard something in the background.
Oh, hold on a second. Hold on a second. It stopped. Okay. So hold on a second. Got it. Okay. So the Ballantine's ale cans. One of the things that happened was basically Rauschenberg introduced Johns to Leo Castelli in 1955, and Leo Castelli fell in love with John's work and gave him a show, and it was a total sellout in 1955, I believe it was. It might have been 56, but anyway, what happened out of that is he continued to sell with Castelli over the years. He de Kooning, who was also working with Castelli, was heard to say, you know, that son of a bitch Castelli, I could give him 2 cans of beer and he could sell them. So Johns heard that and said, well, okay, I'll make a couple of cans of beer. He cast these cans of beer, gave them to Castelli, and sure enough, Castelli sold them. So, you know, taking this everyday stuff and turning it into art is part of the figure ground business. Part of this can be 2 things at once. This can be an object and art. And this is, again, going back to our friend Duchamp and what he was up to. Okay, and this one is a really funny one. Critic, you know, and he's got these 2 mouths for eyes. You know, they don't see a thing. They just talk. Okay. And now we're moving on. So this piece is really a summation, pulling together pulling together the use of the stenciling, the naming of colors, you see up in the upper left-hand corner, this empty cast, basically this cast of Jasper John's leg, actually, and it's reversed. It's inside out. You're seeing the inside of the cast rather than the outside of the cast. Again, flipping things around. John's is good at that. This piece is called Voice. And of course, it's silent. Okay. This is a map of the world, actually constructed by Buckminster Fuller, and he commissioned or got a commission for Johns to paint this. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner the scale of the piece. It was actually commissioned for the Canadian Exposition that was in the late 60s. So it appeared up there, and when Johns went up to see it, he had to paint it in parts because he couldn't see the whole thing in the studio that he had, and he wasn't satisfied with it. So when he brought it back, he worked more on it. So that's why it's from 1967 to 1971. This is, you know, part of a whole series of maps. I haven't shown you a lot of those, but I'll show you a few of them that Johns did. And you know, it's kind of this business of location, of locating yourself, of finding where you are in the world. This is a kind of, you know, it's this dialogue that's going on here. And this piece, okay, Racing Thoughts. This is kind of a major shift that was taking place in John's work in the 60s. But by 1983, the AIDS epidemic had already started, and it was going pretty intensely. And that's part, the mortality, the issues of death, life and death, those elements have begun to appear in his work. And, you know, basically he's starting to really see that the psychological elements that are in these pieces are something that he really does want to engage, that the figure ground, that the thought, that the idea of naming of things had become important to him and part of his work. Okay, and here you have one of his maps that's sort of dissolving away. A lot of the maps are a lot more clearly, you know, delineated. The states are clearer and all that. But here's this business again. You're working with the primary colors and the naming of places, the naming and locating of places. And below you see a large scale cross-hatched piece that's kind of derivative out of this process that he did with these maps, and kind of, you know, using these hatch marks as an abstract indication of spatial relationships. On the right, you see red, yellow, blue, but the yellow is not written in yellow completely. It's written in blue. Okay, so again, the naming of things, this business, calling this Land's End. This has to do with the whole business of oh God, what's that poet's name? I believe it was Hart Crane or somebody. It was a poet who committed suicide, and this hand sticking up was part of what he jumped ship, and people, the last thing that they saw of him was his arm sticking up out of the ocean. So this is a repeated motif that's coming along in the Jasper Johns work. So that's why I thought I'd mention it at this stage of the game. But you know, you have these arrows, which are kind of wayfinding indicators, but where are they going? Okay. On the left is a self-portrait by Edvard Munch, the expressionist painter, and on the right are between the clock and the bed are basically his responses to this. Now, this self-portrait was painted the year before Munch died, so it's definitely about dealing with mortality, about time, about, you know, all of that, you know, fading away. And these two abstract paintings that were done by Johns in the early 80s, again, you know, AIDS, people are dying around him. He's seeing this happening. This piece called Skin with a Frank O'Hara poem attached to it. Now, I didn't dig up the Frank O'Hara poem. I wish I had. But what he did with this is he took his face and he greased up his face and rolled his face across the paper and put his hands on the paper with oil on his hands, and then went over the paper with charcoal. And the places where the oil was where the charcoal stuck the most. So it's kind of, again, harkening back to the business of the targets with the pieces of the human form in them, the partial faces, that presence.
Larry,
yes.
somebody Googled the poet with his suicide arm coming up, and it's
Yeah.
John Barrymore.
No, I don't think so. Not in this case. I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's interesting. Okay, and the skull that's on the right was actually a skull that he had that he put printer's ink on and rolled across the paper to create this piece. So as you can see, he's dealing with this issue of mortality, of the flesh, of the passing, of the dissolving away. Okay, and this piece called Perilous Night was done, again, this is 1983. It was a the piece on the canvas. This is two canvases, and the canvas on the left is actually a tracing. And I'm gonna pull up my marker so that I can show you. Let's see. Pointer, and I'm gonna pull up the laser pointer so that I can point this out. Now you see over here this Grunewald. Now what he did in a lot of these pieces was he took old masters' compositions and he did tracings from them, line drawings from them, and then basically took those and transposed them onto his compositions. So you can see over here the sword and the indication of the skirt, the dress, the garb that this warrior is dressed in, and then if you look over here, you can see the sword this way, and you can see the garb, the folds of the clothing, and the indication of the stone over in here. So the other piece that's in here is a reference back to Picasso again. This handkerchief that is supposedly nailed to the surface is from a weeping female figure in one of Picasso's pieces. And this image, the reason I'm pointing it out is it repeats in a few more of the pieces that I'm going to be showing you. And up here you have these arms that are kind of mottled and diseased, that are kind of hanging from the top of the piece. it's pretty heavy going here. I wasn't ready for this when I dove into Jasper Johns. So we're going to move on. Okay, Four Seasons. This is an installation from left to right. It's, you know, summer, fall, winter, spring. His own shadow cast on the surface. You know, basically there's an indication of the passage of time. You know, that hand swinging with the arrow there. It's kind of like a clock ticking away. Interesting. And again, you've got this figure ground thing going on. You know, it's one thing and it's another. It's multiple things put together here. Okay. And again, 1984, peak of the AIDS crisis. I don't know what he used for the stenciling. I mean, for the tracing that's on the left-hand side of the untitled canvas. I just know it's there, and it was, again, from an old master's piece. Could have been from the Grunwald also. I'm not sure, but you know, you get that there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's layers of things. This piece on the right is a late piece. It's from 2017, so it's more recent. But again, a repeat of the figure ground image of the Picasso. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more about the Picasso business, because basically, what is it that he's obsessed with in Picasso, and why does he keep coming up? Why does he keep coming up? Okay, when we look at a Picasso, these features are all over the place. The figures have breasts on one side, have fingers that are knotted up, have eyes that are on one side of the head, nostrils coming out of the other. Well, in our minds, we're recognizing those elements as a figure, and we read those as figure. So it's two things at once. It's an abstracted painting. It's this weird contorted thing, and at the same time, we read it as a figure. So that's kind of what this is. Again, this duality, this we're reading it one way and seeing it another. Okay, and the set of postcards up at the top. Again, that handkerchief is appearing in all these in these pieces, and you've also got the figure ground picture face thing going on, and there's also this ladder kind of leading you out, kind of going to another place, in two places at once. There's kind of a liminality. There's someplace you're in between things. You know, the piece below is called bridge. So there's this string, this set of strings leading across the thing. And over in here, you see this pattern, which actually harkens back to Picasso again with the Harlequin. Okay, his early paintings of Harlequins had that kind of checkered pattern, diamond pattern on them. And again, we've got the Big Dipper up there, and this image of the cosmos. You know, trying to find ourselves, trying to figure out where we are in the universe, where we are in this gray. And this piece is from a photograph that was crumpled up then he used it, did a tracing from it, and you can see in here a reversed tracing. You can see the bottom of the photograph, and you can see the arm and the head. It's reversed over here, and on this side, it's reversed back again. It's a mirror. They are mirror images of each other, and in between is this skull. And you can see it more clearly down here in the drawing. Actually, this is another painting, come to think of it. So this piece is called Regrets. And another version of it, there are a whole bunch of versions of Regret. Okay, and this piece is from a Life magazine image by a guy by the name of Larry Burroughs, who took the photograph. This is a fellow that just, this is from the 60s. This guy just came back from a battle and lost a lot of his fellow soldiers out there in the field. And this piece right here is actually, if you look really hard here, you can see the abstracted image of him weeping. Very interesting stuff. Okay. And I'm coming to an end, though I could have carried on with this one another half hour easily on a lot of this stuff. The piece on the right is again one of his late pieces. This piece was from 2016, I believe, from a show that was just at Matthew Marks in 2019. It has this heavy texture on it. There's this face in it. There's a number of faces in it. If you look at it, these two eyes and the mouth and the nose, but there's also, these pictographs, these guys trying to figure out where they are in the universe with their crude implements. And then there's this ruler here trying to measure things and figure out where we are. And, maybe these are two eyes and this is the nose and that's the mouth. I don't know. Maybe these are the two eyes and this is the nose and that's the mouth. I don't know. Maybe all of those things. And in John's case, it probably is. So I'm in many ways I'm left speechless when it comes to this guy. I can say a lot of things, but I need a map to get there. So basically, there are some terrific, Roberta Bernstein that talk is available. It's from the Menil Foundation, and she is the person who put together his catalog resume, which is like a 6-volume book of his paintings, and she's really down to earth and very clear and accessible in the way she talks about it. Again, there's a piece from the Royal Academy, which is a really quick, it's only 20 minutes. That one gives you a really quick, concise overview of his work. There's this allegory of painting, which covers his early work. And then there's this piece by John Yo, which is really demanding, but really worth the time, which covers more of his later work and the kind of insight into where his work, the psychological elements that are in these pieces. So at that, I'm going to sign off until next week. We're going to Cézanne.
Okay, and I just want to thank everyone for staying. And somebody wrote that they were speechless.
Perfect.
Presentation. Lots of, because it was an excellent presentation.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Larry. Larry, if you could stay on.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll set up a Zoom. You know what? I'll
Yes.
set up a Zoom in about 3 minutes.
Okay,
So
that's
thank you
fine.
for coming. And it was so interesting. I could see why you said there was a lot to him, and it was difficult. Parts of it was
Yeah, I'm still left with I don't like him, but I respect the hell out of the guy's work.
I can see that. Yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. Stay zen. Bye.